Orchards Civic Association. Civic Association YouTube channel beginning tomorrow, and it's going to be posted on our Facebook page. Today's speaker is Tabitha Woodruff. She is the co-coordinator of the Ohio chapter of National Lawyers Guild. Ms. Woodruff serves in a volunteer capacity as a statewide coordinator of the Ohio chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. She graduated from Wright State University, summa cum laude, in 2009, and from the Ohio State University, Moritz College of Law in 2012. For her day job, she provides pro bono, meaning free, legal services to small businesses and nonprofits. Thank you, Tabitha, for joining us today. She will be leading a Know Your Rights training this afternoon. So, Tabitha, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thanks everyone for taking time out of your day to be here. Of course, this is being recorded too, so hopefully some folks will get to view this later. Would it be possible for me to share my screen to share a PowerPoint?
Yes.
I clicked share your screen and it's not working. Oh, there we go. Okay, let me try that again. Perfect. Okay, here we go. So we'll use a PowerPoint here. All right, let's see. Now let me make that full screen for y'all. Okay. Go to view. All right, there we go. All right, so there are a few different kinds of Know Your Rights trainings. You may have seen Know Your Rights training specifically for immigrant families dealing with ICE. There are also Know Your Rights trainings that focus on what to do if you are pulled over at a traffic stop or if you are arrested. This Know Your Rights training, we're trying to keep it short and sweet. So we're going to focus, just going to hone in on your legal rights at protests. We've had a lot of great uprisings and direct actions this summer. And so we've been asked here at the National Lawyers Guild to share our perspective as attorneys on what your rights are and what you can do to protect yourself when you are out exercising your First Amendment rights. And actually, let me take a moment to talk about who we are. So the National Lawyers Guild is an organization of lawyers, law students, legal workers, and jailhouse lawyers dedicated to the need for change in the structure of our legal, political, and economic system. So our motto is human rights above property interests. And in that vein, we focus on work that is anti-racist, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, and support abolition efforts to end police abolition to end the use of police in our communities, prison abolition to end the use of cages in our communities. And we have different international committees that are in solidarity with Palestine and other groups. Here in Ohio, you probably know us best through our Legal Observer program. What we do is we go to protests and we observe any First Amendment violations. One thing that's important to know about the First Amendment is that you can't violate someone else's First Amendment rights. It's the government that can violate First Amendment rights. So we're not there to watch protesters or what they might be doing. We're there to watch any actions by the government to hinder or prohibit the exercise of the First Amendment. So just to make that clear, if you've seen us in the bright green hats, those are National Lawyers Guild folks. So if you go to our website, which you can get there through ohyonlg.com or ohyonlg.org, we have a webpage there that lists a bunch of resources regarding Know Your Rights. We have tips for trans people dealing with cops in jails. We have Know Your Rights guides that are specific to immigrant families and communities, guides that were written by the National Lawyers Guild, but also by the ACLU, EFF, and other organizations. So when you have the chance, definitely check out our website and go to that webpage and feel free to download any of those resources. So my objectives today are that you will be able to identify what your legal rights are to exercise a protest, understand the limits of those legal rights so that you are able to choose how and when to exercise those rights. What's the goal of that? Well, I want more of us out there exercising our First Amendment rights. I want us to be more equipped to handle the police response. The police here in Columbus have often responded in illegal ways, in violent ways. And so I want to prepare you not just for what your rights are, but for how your rights are likely to be violated and have been violated in the past. That way you can be better prepared for what comes afterwards, and you're better able to protect yourself and others. The agenda is to talk a little bit about things you should know before the protest, things to know during the protest. So keep in mind here that we as attorneys are not here to tell you what to do. Often civil disobedience is a purposeful, planned action that does break perhaps local or state law with the intent of drawing attention to an important issue. So I'm not here to give you legal advice. Nothing in this presentation constitutes legal advice. It is your choice what you do to push against, frankly, the fascist crackdowns that we're seeing in our police state. So I'm certainly not here to limit what you can do or to deter you from any particular action. I just want to make sure that you know what the law is so that you have that in your toolbox, essentially. So, all right. So that's kind of the big thing there is there are your rights that you have. You have a First Amendment right to raise your voice. You have a First Amendment right to protest. The reality is the Columbus Police Department they're actively violating those rights. They're arresting people who are breaking no laws. And that's happening regularly. I've witnessed it personally. Many legal observers are dealing with that. And so I can tell you what your rights are. That does not necessarily mean that law enforcement or our police state is going to recognize that. So when it comes to the First Amendment, limits can only be placed on your right to exercise your First Amendment right to free speech. Limits can only be placed around the time, place, and manner of the protest. So for example, the government is allowed to put laws in place saying that you cannot hold a protest in a surgery room at the hospital during an active surgery, right? They can put restrictions there on the time. So during a surgery that's being conducted, place there at the hospital, and even the manner. So there are different ways to protest. One is to raise your voice. In some neighborhoods, there may be restrictions on when you can have loud music, when you can have loud chanting, and when there are quiet hours. So the government is permitted, despite your First Amendment protections, the government is permitted to put restrictions on the time, place, and manner of your First Amendment rights. The trick is that those government restrictions can't be based on the content of the speech. And this is where lawyers and reporters across the nation are having serious concerns, because I've been out marching and protesting with clergy and family members of those who have been shot and murdered by police, peaceful marching, prayerful marching, playing music. And we've had helicopters swirling above us. We've had sniper rifles trained on us by police officers, which is behavior that's going to discourage us from praying in public about those loved ones that we've lost, right? Yet when we had the Trump rally going around 270 earlier this week, and we had reports of active shooters, the police could not be bothered to respond with helicopters. They certainly didn't have snipers out there. They didn't seem interested at all. And so the trick is how they limit and chill and monitor speech based on the content, based on whether or not we're criticizing them, or are we saying something they agree with, right? If the government response is based on the content of the speech, that's when we know the government's breaking the law. But again, they're the government. So if they're breaking the law, if they're violating your First Amendment rights, there are limited remedies to that. So whether or not you have a right to exercise your free speech, no matter what it is you're saying, whether that's criticizing government officials or the police or anything else, you should have the same First Amendment rights as anybody else. Unfortunately, we do see violations of the First Amendment all the time, right? It is possible for the government to say that you need permits to go to certain places or have protests at certain times. So that's something you might want to consider. Perhaps you are planning a march where the organizers feel that it is in the vein with their mission to get a permit from the city for the march. So in that planning, you can look into getting permits. Now, in order to get a permit to have a march or to have a gathering or a rally, the permit paperwork is going to ask you how many people you expect, how loud it's going to be. Is there going to be music playing or a loudspeaker? Where is it going to be? And you'll have to put that information into the application and submit it for a cost. Here's an example of the city of Cleveland, what their parade permit looks like. So this is just an example. It explains, when do you need a permit? What is a special event? What to submit to the office. And so you can find these on city websites, whether you're in Columbus or Cleveland or a neighboring place. And they'll ask you to fill in your contact information and things like that. And then there is a fee. Regardless of whether or not you choose to get a permit, you certainly don't have to. Know the location. It's really important to scout where you intend to lead folks. Unfortunately, sometimes uprisings are organic. Sometimes direct actions happen in an unplanned way. And that's great. I think it's wonderful to see people out there raising their voices. But if you're planning an event, I think it's really important to scout the route and think about safety concerns. Is this something where there's going to be a lot of loud noise? Are people expecting to take direct actions that might be considered civil disobedience? Is it going to be a safe place for children? Is it going to go past dark? These are the kinds of things you want to prepare people for, because if you are planning more intense direct action, people need a little bit of warning to know that maybe they leave the kids at home. But if it's going to be something that's, a completely different atmosphere, you want to give people a heads up just for safety. So the least you should do, if you're planning an event in advance, is to walk that route, walk the whole route. Look at vantage points, look at where police copters are going to be able to see you, look at where police snipers might be able to sit up, look at where the security cameras are. Police are able to and often do subpoena security footage outside of stores. So there might be stores you're walking past that got cameras pointed at the parking lot. It's just something to be aware of. Maybe you want cameras on your direct action, maybe you don't. So that's just something you want to know ahead of time. Now, if you maybe aren't planning an event, but you're going to go to one, right? You see a Facebook event pop up. One of the first things to do is see who is sponsoring it. Sometimes it's just an individual. And maybe you know them, maybe that's a comrade, maybe that's someone you trust, maybe it's a total stranger. And maybe that's going to, so for me, if I see an event that's being planned by someone I don't know, and I can't tell if they've taken the time to think through safety and response and making sure the protesters are okay, personally, that's an event I might not go to. But if I see that on Facebook it's being sponsored by organizations that I've worked with, organizations that I trust, organizations that I know are going to be there to support protesters if there is police brutality, if something goes terribly wrong, that they're going to have enough experience to know how to respond, that's an event I'm more likely to go to. So that's something to think of when you're deciding what events to show up to. Before you go, you want to think through all of those things and be prepared for your own personal safety. I have some info in here trying to predict how police will respond to what, but they purposely go out of their way to be unpredictable. So sometimes we'll have a completely, simple vigil in a park, and I don't expect a lot of police presence. And then we have tons of police presence and police brutality and arrests and violence, and it can be really scary. Other times we have a really intense direct action, maybe one that's blocking action or blocking traffic, and I expect a bunch of police to show up, and I'm waiting for them, and then they don't. So it can be very difficult to predict. So you want to be prepared regardless for your own safety. First thing to do is write down our jail support number on your arm, or make sure that your loved one has it. If you don't have phone numbers memorized, a lot of us don't anymore, you're going to want to write down the phone number of a loved one. I do jail support work both for the National Lawyers Guild and for the Central Ohio Freedom Fund. And I received a call from inside Jackson Pike a few weeks ago from a man who had been arrested. And they took his cell phone and all his belongings and put it in property. And then he'd been sitting in his jail cell for a week, couldn't remember anyone's phone number to call. So another inmate gave him my cell phone number and said, call Miss Tabitha, she'll try and help. And when he called me, he said, I don't even know my daughter's phone number offhand. So I was able to find his daughter on Facebook and get them in touch. And then she was able to communicate with him. And he was home and safe within a day or two. But if he had just memorized his daughter's phone number, he wouldn't have sat there for a week, right? So if you can't memorize the number, I'd say write down your loved one's number in Sharpie so you can call them collect from jail if you were to be arrested. And then also write down our jail support number, which I've put on every slide just to emphasize that this is a number worth remembering. We also have a 216 number, and we're working on some stuff with that number now. So right now the 614 number is the main one to use, but we use them for kind of different purposes. So I would say for now, write this one down. Also think about if you were arrested, what possessions do you have? I had a friend who works for a local nonprofit, does incredible work, was at a protest and got arrested. They arrested her and a few other people. They took not only her personal cell phone, but her work cell phone. She had work emails in there. She had files saved. She had things she needed. And the police kept her cell phone as evidence for a very, very long time. And she was not able to get it back. I'm actually still not sure if she got it back. This was in July, so they might still actually have it. So if you bring your cell phone, it's possible you're not getting it back. Also think about, I would leave behind any sentimental items. I even think about like, which pair of glasses am I going to wear? Do I have, I'm not going to bring my favorite pair of glasses, right? I might wear my old glasses, my old prescription, just in case, because you don't know what they're going to claim as evidence and what they're not, and what they're going to keep from you. They can keep personal items for years if they claim that it's evidence of a crime that they're investigating. Now, you might want to bring a cell phone. I often do bring my cell phone. I do take that risk because if something happens, I want to be able to get a hold of my loved ones. So if you do bring a phone, make sure that it's locked with a passcode. So if you have it set to where your thumbprint can be used to unlock it, then police are able to force you to put your thumb on your phone to unlock it. That's something they're allowed to do. They cannot make you recite the code. I don't know what the big difference is there, but that's just something to keep in mind. If you are going to bring your cell phone, be sure to turn off the fingerprint open unlock and change it to a passcode. Something else to think about is if you want to have a burner phone that you just pick up somewhere and have that be the phone that you take with you. So that way your phone that you keep all your personal and work stuff is safe at your house, but you have a burner phone that you bring with you just to use in case of an emergency. In terms of communication, we encourage using encrypted communication. We're not certain, but we do believe that the Columbus Police Department has technology to intercept phone calls and text messages from cell phones. We know this technology exists. We believe it's being used here in Columbus. So what we advise people to use is a text messaging app called Signal. It's a free app, easy to download. A lot of people use it just for all their texting. And you can send PDFs, videos, pictures over this texting. You can do group chats, and it's completely and totally encrypted, which means even if it is intercepted by some electronic device, the messages you're sending can't be read. The files that you're sending can't be downloaded. So I advise Signal to folks. Perio is super secure. I have locked myself out of my own Perio account. So I haven't been using it because I can't even get through the security. It's really good. They have that's more extensive. It has like email and other features. So I would say if you're going to be downtown at a protest where you know that there might be police around conducting surveillance, use Signal to text. Don't be sending iMessages or SMS messages or even Facebook messages. So while you're down there, you do have a right under the First Amendment. Granted, I don't know if this right will be violated by the police or not, but you do have a right to walk in crosswalks and cross the street. Unfortunately, this summer we saw a lot of people, the moment they stepped foot from the sidewalk into the street, they were arrested, even in a crosswalk. So that's something to keep in mind. You are allowed to hold signs. While you are allowed to have assault rifles and weapons down at the State House, you are not allowed to have sticks, wooden sticks. You cannot have sticks stuck to your sign. Not a lot of law is logical, people. It's kind of wild. So what we recommend is just hold the signs. Don't put them on a stick. Bring signs that you can hold. You should be allowed to distribute leaflets, pamphlets, and literature. That's one of the most fundamental rights that you have under the First Amendment, is to distribute literature like that. And you should be allowed to take videos and pictures of anything that's in public sight. If it's in public view, it can be photographed, it can be videotaped. Now, granted, you don't want to be like videotaping what's happening inside someone's house or inside an office window. If you're on private property, that changes a little bit. The police cannot demand to see the photos you've taken or the videos that you've taken without a warrant. They are within your phone. They have to have a warrant to take that. That doesn't mean that they'll respect that law. They might do that anyway. So just keep that in mind. One thing we're seeing is that police are saying, you can't videotape this. You can't take photos. And the protesters respond accurately. I can videotape you. I can videotape cops. I can videotape what's happening. And then the cops arrest them and charge them with obstructing justice and say they were interfering with an arrest by videotaping that arrest. So sometimes the prosecutors dismiss those charges. Sometimes they push those charges, and you gotta, that's on you and your attorney to make the argument about why you were not obstructing and interfering with the arrest in the way that you were videotaping it. So that's tricky. The law is clear, but that doesn't mean that it's any fun to defend yourself against criminal charges. So it's just something, it's totally up to you. What you do. I encourage people to videotape and take photographs of the police and what they're doing, but I don't want to encourage people to do that without making sure you're aware that that does put you at risk for arrest. So only you can judge what risks you're comfortable taking and what risks you're not comfortable taking. Sometimes you can't tell how violent police are going to be just by what they're wearing. Sometimes they show up in riot gear and just stand there and don't do much. And then other days when they show up in their white uniforms with bicycles, they're banging their bicycles into people and using those as weapons. So you can't always tell by the way they're dressed how violent they're going to be. If you're down there regularly, you're going to recognize the cops who seem to be really prone to violence. So we have a few that we recognize when they show up, and they are the first to get really violent. So, just be aware, and also be aware of things like counter protesters. Be aware of people who show up as protesters but aren't there to protest with you. Sometimes you can tell when something is about to escalate, and you can decide if you want to stay there for that or if you want to get out. A lot of times police will make a call to sometimes they just start pepper spraying. But if you're hearing these calls to disperse, that's when you need to decide for yourself if you are going to take that risk and stay because it's important to you and what you're doing, or if this is a time when you got to get out of there to protect yourself. So that's something you have to choose for yourself. I've been pepper sprayed. A number of us have been pepper sprayed this summer. It hurts. It's like very, very tingly in a painful way. And if it gets into your eyes and your mouth, then it's going to cause, your body's going to react to it. So some folks will vomit if the pepper spray gets into their mouth or their nose. Sometimes your eyes will water uncontrollably, and so it's difficult to see. You don't want to rub your eyes. You don't want to touch your eyes. That's what's tricky. It's almost like if you've ever been sprayed by a skunk, it's oil, right? So it sticks. So if you rub your eyes and you touch anything else, it's going to get on that. I recommend not wearing contacts to a protest because they can get stuck to your eyes. There's a way to get them out using saline, but it can just make it more painful. Glasses and goggles are better protection from pepper spray. One thing I didn't realize is when I was being pepper sprayed quite a bit, I had managed to wipe my face with saline and was doing fine. And a couple hours later, when I made sure my comrades were safe and I got home, I took a shower, didn't realize how much pepper spray was in my hair. So that pepper spray ran all the way down, and it was like I was pepper sprayed from head to my piggy toes. So keep in mind when you get home, wash your hair in the sink, maybe have a little bit of help because yeah, it's painful, but it subsides. I did not experience intense pain. I got a little lucky from the way I was sprayed that it didn't blind me, but it can be a really painful experience. The thing is, it does go away. The pain does subside, but it can be scary in the moment. The important thing is just to stay calm and just to get somewhere where you can be near water. People like to use milk and Maalox. They say it helps with the pain. It does not actually help cleanse pepper spray any better than just saline water. Saline water is the best thing you can use, but some people do feel that milk and Maalox has like a cooling effect. I don't know if that's just like in our head or not. But I prefer just to use the straight saline solution because that's what will do the best job. And you can get little packets of saline powder, and you can like just the right amount to where if you poured them in a bottle of water, makes that whole bottle of water saline solution. And then put the cap back on, pop a hole in the top, and you use like a squirt bottle to squirt in your eyes. Okay, let's see. We're gonna need to get to questions soon, so I'm gonna try and move a little faster through the slides. So like I mentioned, whether or not a public demonstration is peaceful and legal and we're within our rights, our First Amendment rights, that does not predict whether or not there will be arrests. So whenever you show up, be prepared to be arrested. And by be prepared, I mean things like, is there someone who needs to feed your dog in the morning? Do you got kids? Maybe, drop them off with their auntie, so that if you were to get arrested, they're somewhere safe for the next couple of days. Do you have someone you can call who can call your boss and call in sick for you for the next couple of days? So really think through what happens if I'm trapped in a cage by law enforcement for the next couple of days. Are all my bases covered? Do you have medicine that you need to take? Maybe get that medicine to someone you care about, so that if you are arrested, they can bring your medication down to the jail and insist that the nurse administer it to you. So you'll want to think both about your safety and about the safety of your dependents. What happens if you get arrested? So these are things that typically do trigger a police response. Police will show up. But like I mentioned, they'll also show up when none of these things are happening. But if there is property damage, if there are broken windows or trash cans knocked over, if people are standing in the street or walking in the street, that seems to be the thing that sets them off more than anything. And which is kind of crazy because we'll have protesters who are staying on the sidewalk, staying on the lawn at the state house, and then you have 8 police cars blocking the street. The moment someone steps into traffic to protest, they're arrested for blocking traffic, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but that's what happens. Sometimes people do get in fights at protests. I've been at protests where people are really emotional. We're talking about really serious issues. And so I've seen people show up drunk. I've seen people show up under the influence of drugs. And so that's something else to just be aware of. People have a reason to be upset, and they're upset. And so you also not just watch yourself, but watch how other people are behaving. But if people are actually getting into fights and things, it's likely the police will show up. And if people are failing to respond to police commands, that's when they're more likely to call backup, for example. So if they're telling people to get out of the street and people aren't, you might see more backups coming in. So interacting with the police, cops can lie to you. They can pretend they are not a cop. They will often be in the crowd undercover. They will probably watch this video later. They will attend your organizing meetings when you're planning the protests. They will look at your Facebook events. They will look at the events you've attended. And they can lie to you about all of that. They can lie about their name. They can lie about whether or not they're a cop. So just keep that in mind. You can't trust anything a cop says. You cannot lie to them. Now, this one is a real bummer. If they ask you for your name, your address, and your date of birth, you can't pretend you're Joe Schmo from somewhere else, and you have to actually give them your legal name. So you can refuse, you can exercise your right to remain silent, but you cannot lie to them. You can't give them false information because you will be criminally charged for that. A lot of people think they can schmooze the police. Particularly white people assume this a lot, that we can use our privilege to get around police. And it's true that our police department has proven to be a racist organization that targets our communities of color, that targets our Black communities. But that does not mean that our police are not going to attack, arrest, shoot, and kill white folks too in our neighborhood. So do not assume that you can use whatever connections you have, whatever privilege you have to talk your way out of a situation. A lot of times all you're doing is just giving them a bunch of info they're going to use against you later. So your 4 most important rights when you're dealing with a cop: you have a right to remain silent. You have a right to be free of unreasonable searches. You have a right to leave if you're not being detained. If you're not under arrest for anything, they're not investigating anything, then you have a right to leave. They can't make you just stay there and wait until they figure out if they want to arrest you, right? And you do have a right to speak with an attorney. They don't always have to provide that attorney, But if you're able to get to one, you have a right to speak to a lawyer. So exercising your rights. You can, when a cop asks you a question, you can say nothing. You can say, I choose not to speak. You can say, I plead the fifth. You can say nothing at all. So just keep that in mind. You have a right to say, I don't want to talk to you. If you don't speak, nothing you've said can be used against you. So, think about, when later, if you have a day in court, they don't have anything, they can say, well, she was just quiet the whole time, right? So, so I do prefer remaining silent over anything. They can ask you for your name, address, and date of birth. I do think it is important to disclose that if you're asked, but you have a right to remain silent. So you don't, as long as you don't give them fake information, you're good in that spot there. But you can be charged with failure to disclose that personal information. And that's why I say I think it's good to give your name, address, and date of birth. I can see why some people would just want to stay silent and risk being charged under this law. But that's kind of a decision that you would have to make, and it's based on your own circumstances. If they begin going through your bag, if they begin going through your pockets, if they take your phone and go through your phone, if they try to go through your car, you will want to audibly say, I do not consent to this search, in hopes that whether it's their body cam or any other recording equipment that gets that, you want to put it out there, verbally say, I do not consent to this search. Because it is possible if a cop walks up to you and says, may I go through your purse? If you say, oh my gosh, we'll have at it, sure. They don't have to have probable cause in that situation if you consent to the search. So it's important to make it clear, I do not consent. We've seen some disturbing court decisions saying that because, particularly this is one where it was a body search, it was a cavity search. And the court found because she didn't protest enough that she essentially consented to the search, regardless of whether or not it was warranted. Very sexist, very disturbing decision by the court in that case. So you certainly should, if you can, verbalize that you're not consenting to whatever search is happening. And searches should be reasonable. So they should have a warrant if they're going to come into your house. They should not be able to search your house without a warrant. Now, when I say that you should say, I do not consent, I'm not advising you to physically stop them or to yank your bag back or to slam your car door. That's not a good idea unless you're prepared to be charged with resisting arrest. So those could be considered a resisting arrest, but just saying I do not consent, that should not be considered resisting arrest. Now, if a cop shows up to your house, is knocking on the door and says, I want to search your house, they need to have a warrant. There have been situations in the past where officers, I'm not sure about Columbus, but certainly in other jurisdictions where officers showed up with a piece of paper they signed themselves and pretended like it was a warrant, and it wasn't. It has to be signed by a judge, not a cop. It has to be signed by a judge, and it has to explain what they are there to search for and what the scope of that search is. So a warrantless search, so if they're trying to search like your body at a protest, for example, or your purse at a protest, they have to have reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. So what's reasonable and what isn't is where the fine line is, whether or not they have probable cause to be doing those things. That's the tricky part, but technically they're not supposed to be conducting unreasonable searches without a warrant. Let's see. All right, I'm going to go through these slides a little faster because I want to leave time for questions. So cops do not need a paper warrant to search a car. They just have to suspect, they have to have probable cause that there is a crime that they need to investigate. So what they'll often say is that they smell drugs, because that's the hardest for them to prove in court. So they say, well, I smell drugs on her, so I went through her whole car. So that can sometimes be considered enough to warrant a warrantless search. So certainly if they begin searching your purse or your car, like I mentioned, you can say, I don't consent to what's happening right now, just to put that on the record. See, we went over cell phone safety. And then something else to ask about is if they have you, and particularly they do this when it's like a group of people, they're kind of holding you or blocking you into an area, you will want to ask, am I free to leave? They can't hold you there for no reason. They have to be, if you're under arrest, you're being detained in relation to a crime they're investigating, then they can hold you. Now, if they think you're just like a witness to a crime, there's a time limit on how long they can make you stay in a particular area. But if you're not under arrest and you're not being detained, they have to let you walk off. So if you say, "Am I free to go? Can I go home? Am I being detained?" And they say no, then you're able to calmly walk away. Now, if I have seen in the past to where if as you're walking away, because a lot of times that's going to piss off the cop, right? So if you say, "Am I free to go?" That might make the cop angry. And so as you're walking away, just know they might be looking for things to arrest you for at that point because they are frustrated. So it can be helpful to avoid doing anything that they might try and charge you with, because that's a lot of times where all of a sudden there's just a disorderly conduct as you're leaving the scene because they didn't like the way you were leaving. So just be careful of that. If you walk away calmly, it can mitigate those risks a little bit. All right. So if you ask, "Am I free to go?" and they say no, that means you're being detained. That's when you exercise your right to remain silent. If you say, "Am I free to go?" and they say you're being arrested, then let them know you would like the opportunity to speak to a lawyer immediately, and then remain silent. If you say, "I would like to speak to an attorney," they have to give you access to a phone to call an attorney. How many people have an attorney's phone number memorized though, right? Not a lot of us, right? So that's where you could call the National Lawyers Guild hotline and let them know that you would like an attorney. You would like, we do have some attorneys that occasionally have the capacity to volunteer and represent protesters, and we can work to try to link you to those lawyers. Sometimes we don't have anyone available, but sometimes we do. So you would want to call that number there and let them know that you're trying to reach an attorney. So once you ask for a lawyer, they're supposed to stop interrogating you. They're supposed to stop asking you questions about what you were doing. Try to remember, if they keep asking you questions, if they keep interrogating you, if they keep pushing you and asking for information, that is something that it's banned by the law. And so it's something you'll want to take note of in case, there are legal actions moving forward. It is helpful to ask for the officer's name and badge number, or to write it down if you can see it. We have seen Columbus police officers at protests with tape over their badge number. They're not supposed to do that. So sometimes it can be tricky. In that case, you might want to try and just remember a description of them if you can. Look for people who witnessed your interaction with the police. If you're at a protest and you're being arrested, it's helpful to call out to the legal observers your name and date of birth. Sometimes that's tricky, but it is helpful to have other people there at the protest who know your name and date of birth and know where you're at. Buddy system's really important at a protest. So if the police take you and in the chaos, your friends don't know what happened or where you went, but they suspect that you were taken, they can go up to a legal observer and say, "I think my friend was arrested. I think they might have been taken," and give your legal name and your date of birth so that they can, because we can pull it up in the Franklin County websites and see, if someone's in jail yet. Sometimes it takes a few hours for the data to get into the website, unfortunately, but it at least gives us something in terms of trying to find out what happened. These are resources I listed at the beginning. Just wanted to remind you again, this was a really short training and I went over a lot of info really fast. Of course, none of it constitutes legal advice, but hopefully it gives you some legal information that's useful to you as you are out there standing up for what you believe in, standing up against fascism and the police state. We want to encourage you to keep doing that, but we want to make sure as lawyers, it's our job to provide you that education and information so that you're armed with it. So definitely check out our website to get more info. And then if you want to reach out to us, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can email us at ohio@nlg.org. Of course, we have our website there. So feel free to reach out if there's anything that we can do to help you out. If you're planning a protest and you need legal observers, that's the email address you'll want to reach out to and just let them know how many people you're expecting, where and when, and we'll see if we can get some green hats out there. So that's all I have. Do we have any questions out there? None off the bat. Well, that's good. Hopefully that means I covered everything.
Tabitha, that was a lot of information, and I don't know about anyone else, but being able to say, okay, which slide did I see that particular information on? Do
Yeah.
you provide a little pocketbook size document that people can have with them that will enable them to access quickly?
Yes. So here on our website, can you all see where I'm scrolling through? Under our Know Your Rights page, we have, um, let's see, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom here. I know we have a card that we've prepared, so let me see if I can find a copy of that. Yeah, it's just a Know Your Rights card. This is something you can keep in your pocket. You can print copies of. Try and get this to load. Yeah, so this is just the real basics, trying to break down the important parts of the PowerPoint. These are great to pass out to folks when you're having a planning meeting for a protest. Looks like it has our Cleveland, our 216 number. You could always just fill in the 614-OH77, 614 NLG OH77 number too. So feel free to, download those from our website. It's available there. So, yeah. Does that
Thank
answer
you.
your question? Yeah. Okay. Great.
Are there any other questions?
Oh, Rachel, sounds like you're muted.
I'm really bad at that. Okay, we have a question from Becca Kravitz.
Mhm.
If you recognize the police that are instigating violence,
Mhm.
how are they still employed with CPD?
That is a great question. Unfortunately, we have seen police officers identified. Detective Rosen is a name you might have heard, who are caught on video violently assaulting the citizens they're meant to protect. Documentation of officers that have shot and killed multiple citizens, and yet they're still on our streets with a badge. So that's a question I ask myself every day, and it's certainly a great question to ask your elected city council officials, because it's a serious problem, and particularly as city councils. I believe they were, at least recently, were working on renegotiating the police union contract. While unions are important to protect labor rights, we certainly don't want them to protect the right of someone who is killing the citizens they're supposed to protect. Their right to employment should not be protected, in my opinion, at that point. So yeah, that's a great question. And it blows my mind as much as it does anybody else's. Thank you for bringing that up.
Tabitha, I have a question, and I think you discussed this a little bit, but obviously you're an attorney. This is an organization that's certainly, led and organized by other attorneys, but what volunteer opportunities are there for folks who are interested in being a part of the work that y'all do? Whether it's, the legal observers, which are obviously kind of more visible and on the kind of front line of the fight against injustice. But outside of that, do you have to be an attorney to be a legal observer? Do you have to be an attorney to support other work that y'all do here throughout the state and in Columbus?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually need more non-lawyers in our organizations. Lawyers have very similar ways of thinking and looking at the world, and we need we need you folks to help us do a better job of what we do. Essentially, we need your perspectives. We actually have recently contracted 2 field organizers, one in Columbus, who is Mia Santiago, and one field organizer up in Cleveland named Janie Lee, and they are working to expand our capacity, to reach out to people, and they'll be working on different projects that certainly need volunteers. 3 volunteer opportunities I want to highlight. First of all, definitely reach out to Mia or Janie if you can. You can reach them by messaging us on social media. They manage our social media and they do tons of other great work. So they could certainly have a conversation with you about plugging you in. But also, the 3 volunteer opportunities I want to highlight is we do have that 614 hotline, 614 NLG OH77, and we have an incredible hotline team that mans that. They do their best to have people ready to answer those calls 24/7 when we know there are active actions happening around the entire state of Ohio. This is something you can do from home. This is something you can do from your computer, from anywhere in the state. So we could certainly use more folks volunteering on the hotline. We also have a project that has spun off. It's with some Ohio NLG members and some members of the local DSA called COHAN, the Central Ohio Housing Access Network. They have literally hundreds of volunteers out right now, which is very exciting. What they're doing is taking packets of legal information and taking them to homes that have had evictions filed against them. So the folks in those homes are educated about tenant landlord law in Ohio and about their rights, and just a reminder about their court date. It's really easy to do. You get a shift of maybe 2 hours. You get a number of packets and just addresses where you can drop them. So it's no contact delivery. It just takes a few hours out of your day, but they could certainly use more folks as they're trying to ramp up that project. So that's the Central Ohio Housing Access Network. They do have a Facebook page, and it was a few NLG members that originally were part of launching it, but they could certainly use more people there. And then the third way, as you might imagine, is to become a green hat, become a legal observer. So we do regular legal observer trainings. They're not consistent just yet. That's something that Mia and Janie are working on with us to get us more on the ball with these sort of things. If you email ohio@nlg.org, let them know your name, who you are, why you're interested in legal observing. You'll be added to a list. And then when the next legal observer training is scheduled, you'll be notified. So those are just 3 different ways to volunteer, but there are many, many, many more. I'm sure if you reach out to Mia and Janie, they can detail some for you.
Are there other questions? Well, I have a question. I'm not sure. Do you need to be a lawyer to be a legal observer?
Nope. You just need to be able to observe what's happening. So I would say, as long as you can see and hear what's happening and document it in written notes, that's the only thing we expect of you. It does come with the possibility that you would be a witness in court. So that's something your notes are attorney-client product. So the idea is that if someone does have to take legal action to protect their First Amendment rights or prosecute the violations of those First Amendment rights or defend themselves against a criminal action, the notes you're taking as a legal observer belong to their attorney. So the idea is that you're essentially kind of a conduit for their lawyer, but you don't actually have to be a lawyer yourself.
I have another question, Tabitha. We talked a little bit about what it looks like observing, the actions of law enforcement, protests. I guess I'm curious, as a resident of a neighborhood, particularly, I used to work for a nonprofit right here in Southern Orchards, and we have obviously, a strong police presence in our community, being that we're, right in the heart of the city. I guess I'm curious if I see the police interacting with somebody in my neighborhood and maybe I have concerns about that interaction, how is it best for me to observe that without putting the person who they're interacting with at risk or further escalating the situation? Is it, I guess that's for my determination. Is it my place to engage in that? What should I be looking out for, and in what ways could I be helpful, if anything were to kind of, proceed into the future, legality wise?
Yeah. That's a really good question, because it can be such a case by case basis, and it can be so tricky. And certainly I think it's great to videotape and take pictures of police action, of arrests. I think that's an important thing to do, but you certainly don't want to do anything that might cause the person being arrested to suffer more or to be charged with extra things. And so when I'm able to, I try to ask that person, are you okay? Do you need help? A lot of times you're not able to get close enough to them to say that. So if you can, certainly it should be up to the person if they want your assistance, if they want you to interfere. But I think videotaping and observing from afar, and if you're seeing an escalating situation, I think it is a good idea to reach out to organizations like the Ohio NLG, to ask them, is there any way you can dispatch someone to the scene here? Because I'm, this is a really intense situation. We're mostly volunteer. We're almost entirely volunteer, but besides our 2 independent contractors. So it can be tricky. It's unlikely. We don't have 24/7 responders, but there are situations where we have been able to respond instantly when something bad is happening with the police. And sometimes we're able to get somebody on the scene right then. Yeah, I think a lot of times just being there and the cops knowing that someone's watching, and I think that can make a really big difference sometimes. As much as I want to be yelling exactly what I think about them, a lot of times my approach, just my personal approach, is to be obnoxiously pleasant with the police the whole time and just make sure they know I'm watching. So that's my personal approach, but whatever works for you. Do what you can. Our police need to know that we're watching, that we're not satisfied, and that they need to do better.
Well, thank you so much, Tabitha. That was really informative and helpful. So as I mentioned at the beginning of today's session, if you haven't already, please take a moment to complete the survey. You can find that in the chat room. And clearly, if you want to learn more about the work of the Ohio chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, you can go to the website www.ohionlg.com. As a reminder, you can find a complete schedule of today's events also in the chat room, and also via the Southern Orchards Facebook page. Our next session will be Stacy Little with the Central Ohio Freedom Fund, and she'll be leading the next session right here on the same channel at Zoom. Thank you all for attending.
Hey, Stacy. I'm gonna head off to work, but it was good to be with you all.
And so everyone, real quickly, sorry not to make this too complicated. We had this session come up pretty close to our next session. What we're going to do is, if everyone could bear with me, I'm going to end this session and end the recording, and then I'm just going to restart the session right away. So if you wouldn't mind just re-logging in real quick. I think a couple people joined us a little bit late. Stacy, I know you just jumped on. So as I mentioned, just to make it simplify it, I'm going to end the session and then restart the session with a new recording. That'll also clear the chat so that it's clean for our next session as well. So just give me 60 seconds here, probably less than that, and we'll start this new chat.